The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's main street when 70-year-old Caspian Holloway led his father's ancient mare into town. The horse, whom everyone called Wistba for her silent gait, moved with the careful steps of an animal far past her prime. Her coat, once a lustrous chestnut, had faded to the color of autumn leaves left too long on the ground. "Look what the wind blew in," sneered Mayor Bartholomew Crane from his porch, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never worked a day with his hands. Old Holloway's boy and his walking glue factory. The crowd gathered at Murphy's general store erupted in laughter. Mrs. Evangeline Frost, the town's self-appointed social coordinator, fanned herself dramatically. "Honestly, Caspian, why doesn't your father just put that poor creature out of her misery? It's embarrassing for the whole town." Caspian's jaw tightened, but he continued walking toward the veterinarian's office. Wistba had been limping for 3 days, and Dr. Ignatius Vale was the only man in 50 miles who might help. The boy's calloused hands trembled slightly as he gripped the lead rope. Not from fear, but from the burning shame that crept up his neck like poison ivy. 23 years old, that horse, called out Jasper Wainwright, the banker's son who'd never lacked for anything. "My father says she's older than some of the buildings in this town." Pathetic, really. The onlookers nodded in agreement, their faces twisted with the particular cruelty that small towns sometimes cultivate like prize roses. Children pointed and giggled, mimicking Wistba's careful gait with exaggerated limps that sent their parents into fresh peals of laughter. But Caspian had learned long ago that defending himself only made things worse. His family's farm sat on the outskirts of town, barely profitable, held together by determination and the kind of stubborn pride that his grandfather had passed down like a family heirloom. They couldn't afford a young horse, couldn't afford much of anything beyond the necessities. "She's not just old," continued Mrs. Frost, her voice dripping with false concern. "She's dangerous. What if she collapses right here in the street? Think of the children." Dr. Vale's office stood at the end of the street like a sanctuary, its white-painted walls a stark contrast to the weathered storefronts surrounding it. Caspian quickened his pace, Wistba matching his urgency despite her obvious discomfort. The mare's ears swiveled constantly, picking up every harsh word, every burst of laughter that followed them like a thundercloud. Caspian. The voice belonged to Cordelia Ashworth, the blacksmith's daughter, who emerged from her father's shop with concern etched across her face. "Don't listen to them," whispers a good horse. Her kindness only seemed to fuel the crowd's mockery. "Look," Mayor Crane bellowed, "the blacksmith's girl has a soft spot for lost causes too. How touching." As they reached the veterinarian's office, Caspian could feel the weight of the entire town's judgment pressing down on his shoulders. He'd endured their ridicule for years, but today felt different. Today, something in Wistba's gentle brown eyes seemed to promise that their story was far from over. The door to Dr. Vale's office creaked open, and man and horse stepped inside, leaving the laughter echoing in the street behind them like the ghost of their humiliation. Dr. Ignatius Vale had been Millbrook's veterinarian for 37 years, and in that time he'd seen enough suffering, both animal and human, to recognize the weight that young Caspian carried on his shoulders. The elderly doctor's examination room smelled of antiseptic and hay, a sterile sanctuary where judgment held no power. "Easy, girl," Dr. Vale murmured as he ran his weathered hands along Wistba's legs. The mare stood perfectly still, as if she understood the gravity of the moment. Her breathing was labored, and when the doctor pressed gently against her right foreleg, She flinched almost imperceptibly. Caspian watched in silence, his heart hammering against his ribs. The savings jar at home contained exactly $43.16 money his family had scraped together over months for this very possibility. It wouldn't be enough for surgery, barely enough for medication, but it was all they had. "Son," Dr. Vale said finally, straightening his aching back, "I need to be honest with you. Whisper's got severe arthritis in both front legs, and there's something else." He paused, his pale blue eyes meeting Caspian's. Her heart's working too hard. The strain of compensating for the pain in her legs has weakened it considerably. The words hit Caspian like a physical blow. "What does that mean?" "It means most folks would put her down," Dr. Vale said gently. "The humane thing, they'd call it. End her suffering before it gets worse." Through the window, they could hear the distant sound of laughter from the street. Someone was still telling the story of the farmer's boy and his pathetic horse, turning their pain into entertainment. "But you're not most folks, are you?" Dr. Vale continued, studying Caspian's face. "There's something between you and this mare that goes deeper than ownership." Caspian's throat felt raw. "She saved my life once. When I was 12, I fell through the ice on Miller's Pond. Everyone else gave up looking, but Whisper... She led my father right to where I'd gone under, stood there whinnying until he found me." Dr. Vale nodded slowly. "Animals remember kindness, son, and they remember debts." He moved to his medicine cabinet, withdrawing several bottles. "I can give you pain medication for her arthritis, and there's a heart supplement that might help. But I won't lie to you, it's not a cure. At best, it might give her a few more comfortable months." "How much?" Caspian asked, dreading the answer. "These medications would normally cost about $200, Dr. Vale said, watching the boy's face crumble. "But I've got some samples here that the pharmaceutical rep left. Consider them a loan between friends." Caspian's eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. "Sir, I can't. You can, and you will," Dr. Vale interrupted firmly. "But I need something from you in return. Promise me you'll give her the best possible care, even when it gets hard, even when people tell you you're wasting your time." As Dr. Vale prepared the medications, explaining dosages and warning signs to watch for, Whisper turned her head toward the window. Outside, Mayor Crane was holding court in front of Murphy's store, his voice booming across the street. "Mark my words," the mayor was saying, "that horse won't last another month. Old Holloway's throwing money away on a lost cause, just like his father did, and his father's father before him. It's in their blood, backing the wrong horse, if you'll pardon the expression." The crowd's laughter felt like needles against Caspian's skin, but something had changed in Whisper's posture. Her ears were no longer drooping with exhaustion. Instead, they stood alert, almost defiant, as if she'd made some internal decision that even she couldn't fully understand yet. Dr. Vale handed Caspian the bag of medications. "Son, I've been in this business long enough to know that sometimes miracles were the most unlikely disguises. Don't let them convince you to give up hope." As they prepared to leave, Whisper's gait seemed different, not healed, but somehow more purposeful. The mayor who had entered the office as the town's laughingstock walked out with her head held higher, carrying secrets that only she understood. 3 weeks after Dr. Vale's diagnosis, Millbrook received an unexpected visitor. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday morning driving a pristine silver pickup truck with license plates from Kentucky horse country. His name was Montgomery Fairchild, and he wore the kind of quiet confidence that came from a lifetime of working with thoroughbreds worth more than most people's houses. Fairchild had driven 800 miles following a lead that had started with a faded photograph and a decades-old memory. In his briefcase sat documentation that would have shocked the people of Millbrook if they'd bothered to look beyond their own assumptions about the farmer's old mare. He found the Holloway farm just as the sun reached its peak, casting everything in the harsh light of midday truth. Caspian was in the paddock with Wistba, administering her afternoon medication with the patience of someone who'd learned to measure hope in teaspoons. The mare stood quietly, her coat gleaming from the daily brushing that had become part of their ritual. "Excuse me, Fairchild," called from the fence line. "I'm looking for the owner of that chestnut mare." Caspian looked up, immediately defensive. Over the past weeks, several people had stopped by the farm, drawn by the gossip spreading through town about the fool boy and his dying horse. Most came to gawk, a few to offer unsolicited advice about putting Wistba out of her misery. "I'm her owner," Caspian said carefully. "Can I help you?" Fairchild studied Wistba with the trained eye of someone who'd spent 40 years evaluating horses. What he saw made his pulse quicken with the thrill of discovery. "Son, do you know anything about your mare's bloodline?" "She's just a farm horse," Caspian replied, but something in the stranger's voice made him step closer to the fence. "Been in our family since before I was born." "Just a farm horse," Fairchild repeated softly, then pulled out his briefcase. "Tell me, has she ever shown any unusual behaviors? Any signs of ... exceptional intelligence or ability?" Caspian's mind flashed to countless memories. Wistba opening gate latches that should have been beyond her reach, finding lost cattle in storms when even the best ranch hands couldn't track them, the way she seemed to anticipate his needs before he expressed them. "Maybe," he admitted cautiously. Fairchild opened his briefcase and withdrew a photograph yellowed with age. It showed a magnificent chestnut mare standing in a winner's circle, draped with roses, a gleaming trophy beside her. "This is Autumn. Glory, Triple Crown contender from 1988. She finished second in the Kentucky Derby by less than a nose, won the Preakness, and was favored to win the Belmont Stakes." Caspian stared at the photograph, noting the distinctive white blaze on the mare's forehead, the elegant arch of her neck, the intelligent eyes that seemed familiar. Autumn Glory disappeared 3 days before the Belmont Stakes, Fairchild continued. Her trainer claimed she'd been sold to a private buyer overseas, but there were whispers that she'd been spirited away to protect her from something darker. The racing world lost track of her completely. The implications hung in the air like morning mist. Fairchild pulled out another documenter breeding registry that made Caspian's breath catch in his throat. Autumn Glory had one confirmed foal before she disappeared. A filly born in late 1989, sired by Northern Wind, another champion. That filly would be about 34 years old now, if she was still alive. Caspian's mathematical mind, sharpened by years of calculating feed costs and medication schedules, quickly processed the timeline. Wistba's age, her arrival at the farm, the way his grandfather had always been vague about where she'd come from. "You think Wistba is I. Think your grandfather acquired a very special mare under circumstances that were probably best left unquestioned," Fairchild said diplomatically. "And I think the people of this town have been laughing at royalty without knowing it." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of voices drifted across the fields from the direction of town. Mayor Crane's distinctive bellow carried clearly in the still air, heard the old nags still hanging on. Surprised she hasn't dropped dead from embarrassment by now. Fairchild's expression hardened. Son, I have some tests I'd like to run, if you're willing. Blood work, some basic measurements. Nothing invasive, nothing that would hurt her. But if I'm right about who she is, then this town owes your family and this Maratha biggest apology in its history. In the paddock, Wistba raised her head and looked directly at Fairchild, as if she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. Her eyes held the wisdom of a horse who remembered grandstands and roses, who had run with the wind at her heels and the thunder of hooves behind her. The queen of the racetrack had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally see. Past the arthritis and grey whiskers to the champion beneath. The test results arrived on a Friday, morning that would forever divide Millbrook's history into before and after. Fairchild's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope from the genetic testing laboratory, though he'd been expecting confirmation of what his experienced eye had already told him. DNA match, 99.97%. Probability. Wistba was indeed the daughter of Autumn Glory and Northern Wind, making her one of the most valuable thoroughbreds in American racing history. Her bloodline included champions dating back to Secretariat's era, a lineage that racing enthusiasts would have paid millions to possess. Caspian stood in his family's modest kitchen, staring at the documents spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle that had finally been solved. Birth certificates, racing records, breeding charts, all confirming that their gentle farm mare was equine royalty. Your grandfather knew, Fairchild said quietly. He had to have known. Men like him don't just stumble across horses like this. The story, as Fairchild had pieced it together through old contacts and racing world whispers, was both tragic and beautiful. Autumn Glory's trainer had been approached by men who wanted to use the mare for illegal gambling schemes, fixing races, manipulating odds. When he refused, they threatened to harm the horse. So he faked her sale and disappeared her, Fairchild explained. Your grandfather was known in racing circles as a man who could be trusted with secrets. He took her in, gave her a new name, and let her live the life of an ordinary farm horse. Caspian thought of his grandfather's stories about Wistba, the way his eyes would twinkle when he talked about how special she was, how she'd earned her place at their farm through extraordinary circumstances he'd never fully explained. She's been hiding in plain sight for over 20 years, Fairchild continued. And now, thanks to modern DNA testing, we can prove who she really is. That afternoon, Fairchild made a phone call that would change everything. Within hours, reporters from the Louisville Courier-Journal, the Blood Horse magazine, and even a stringer from ESPN were making their way toward Millbrook. The story was irresistible. The lost champion mare, living anonymously on a struggling farm, mocked by a town that had no idea they were in the presence of greatness by evening. The first news van had arrived, its satellite dish extending toward the sky like a metallic flower seeking the sun. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Valencia Cruz, had covered enough horse racing to understand the magnitude of the story. This is unprecedented, she told her cameraman as they set up outside the Holloway farm. We're talking about a horse that could have been worth millions in breeding fees alone. The racing world has been searching for Autumn Glory's bloodline. For decades, word spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The same people who had mocked Caspian and whispered that morning were now hurrying to the farm, drawn by the news vans and the intoxicating possibility of being part of something extraordinary. Mayor Crane arrived first, his usual bombast replaced by the calculating smile of a politician sensing opportunity. "Caspian, my boy," he called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. I always knew that Mayor was something special. Always said so, didn't I, Martha? He turned to his wife, who nodded with the enthusiasm of someone desperately rewriting history. Mrs. Evangeline Frost appeared next, fanning herself with the same dramatic flair she'd employed during her ridicule of Wistba weeks earlier. Oh, I just knew she had royal blood in her veins. Anyone with eyes could see it. Such a noble bearing, such dignity. The crowd grew larger as the evening progressed, filling the Holloway's modest yard with people who suddenly claimed to have always seen Wistba's potential, always recognized her worth, always defended her against the doubters. Caspian watched this transformation with a mixture of bewilderment and growing anger. These were the same people who had laughed at him, who had called Wistba a walking glue factory, who had suggested putting her down to spare the town embarrassment in the paddock. Wistba stood calmly amid the chaos, her head high, her eyes reflecting the camera lights with the regal bearing of a horse who had always known exactly who she was. She seemed almost amused by the sudden attention, as if she'd been waiting patiently for the rest of the world to catch up to what she'd always understood about herself. The Queen had been revealed, and now the entire kingdom would have to answer for how they'd treated her in exile. The morning after the news broke, Millbrook woke to find itself at the center of a media storm. National news cruise-lined Main Street, their bright lights and bustling activity transforming the sleepy town into something resembling a movie set. The story had captured the country's imagination, the lost thoroughbred champion, the humble farmer's family who'd protected her secret, and the town that had mocked royalty without knowing it. Valencia Cruz's report had aired on the national morning show, complete with side-by-side photos of Wistba in her current state and autumn glory in her racing prime. The resemblance was unmistakable. Once pointed out the same intelligent eyes, the same distinctive blaze, the same elegant bone structure that arthritis and age couldn't fully disguise. The town of Millbrook has been living with racing royalty. For over 2 decades, Cruz reported from outside Murphy's General Store, but treated this champion mare like a burden. Local residents regularly mocked the horse and her young caretaker, never realizing they were in the presence of one of America's most valuable missing thoroughbreds. The report included interviews with racing historians who spoke reverently about Autumn Glory's bloodline, veterinarians who marveled at Wistba's longevity despite her condition, and most damning of all, cell phone footage that someone had secretly recorded weeks earlier of Mayor Crane leading the crowd in their cruel laughter by noon. The story had been picked up by major news networks, sports channels, and social media platforms worldwide. The hashtag Wistba the champion was trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of underdogs and hidden worth. Caspian found himself overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Reporters thrust microphones in his face, asking how it felt to discover his horse's true identity, whether he planned to capitalize on her value, what message he had for those who had mocked them. "She was always valuable to us," he told Valencia Cruz during his only formal interview. "Her bloodline doesn't change who she is or how we feel about her. She's been our family for 23 years. That's worth more than any amount of money." The town's residents, meanwhile, were scrambling to manage their own public relations crisis. Mayor Crane held an impromptu press conference, attempting to spin his previous comments as good-natured ribbing between neighbors, and claiming he'd always supported the Holloway family. But the internet never forgets, and the cell phone footage of his mockery had already been viewed millions of times. Comments poured in from around the world, condemning the town's treatment of Caspian and Wistba, with many calling for the mayor's resignation. Mrs. Evangeline Frost fared no better. Her dramatic declarations about Wistba being dangerous and embarrassing had been recorded and shared widely, making her the subject of countless memes and viral videos. About the importance of kindness over appearances, the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Cordelia Ashworth, the blacksmith's daughter who had been the only person to defend Wistba publicly, found herself elevated to local hero status. News outlets sought her out as the voice of conscience in a town that had lost its way. Some people see with their hearts instead of their prejudices, she told a reporter. Caspian and Wistba have taught this town something about real value that can't be measured in dollars or bloodlines. As the day progressed, offers began pouring in from around the world. Racing enthusiasts wanted to purchase Wistba for astronomical sums. Museums offered to display her as a living piece of racing history. Veterinary schools requested to study her longevity and health management. But the most meaningful offer came from an unexpected source: the Kentucky Horse Park, America's premier equine museum and education center. They wanted to create a permanent exhibit telling Wistba's story, not just her racing pedigree, but her 23 years of humble service on a small farm, her role in saving a boy's life, and the lesson about seeing worth beyond appearances. She would live like the queen she's always been, the curator explained to Caspian over the phone. Proper medical care, climate-controlled stabling, visitors from around the world coming to pay their respects. And you could visit whenever you wanted. You could even work here if you were interested. That evening, as the media circus continued to swirl around them, Caspian stood in the paddock with Wistba, brushing her coat as he had every night for years. The mare stood quietly, occasionally nuzzling his shoulder with the same gentle affection. She'd always shown. "What do you think, girl?" he whispered, ready to be famous. Wistba's response would prove to be the most powerful moment in a week full of revelations, gestures so profound that it would complete the transformation of not just a town, but everyone who witnessed it. The moment that would define Millbrook's redemption came at sunset on the 7th day after Wistba's identity was revealed. The media circus had reached its peak, with representatives from the Kentucky Horse Park waiting for Caspian's decision, offers totaling millions of dollars sitting on the kitchen table, and the entire town watching to see what the farmer's son would choose. Caspian had spent the week in a whirlwind of interviews, contract negotiations, and soul-searching. The practical part of his mind understood that accepting the Kentucky Horse Park's offer would secure his family's financial future and give Wistba the medical care she deserved. The money from other offers could save the farm, pay for his college education, and provide security his family had never known. But as he stood in the paddock that evening, something felt incomplete about all the grand offers and glittering opportunities. Wistba had lived 23 years as a humble farm horse, finding her purpose not in racing glory but in quiet service-pulling equipment, teaching children to ride, saving a boy from drowning, providing companionship to a family who had always seen her true worth. The crowd had gathered again, drawn by rumors that Caspian would announce his decision. Mayor Crane lurked at the edge of the group, his political career hanging by a thread after a week of national ridicule. Mrs. Frost stood silent for once, her usual dramatic flair subdued by the weight of her public humiliation. Valencia Cruz was there with her camera crew, ready to capture whatever happened next. Dr. Vale had come to check on his patient one final time. Cordelia Ashworth stood near the fence, her face reflecting the same quiet dignity that had made her the town's unlikely moral compass. "I've made my decision," Caspian announced, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "But first, I want to say something to all of you." He looked directly at Mayor Crane, then at Mrs. Frost, then at each face in the crowd that had mocked them just weeks earlier. Wistba's bloodline didn't make her valuable. Her championships didn't make her special. What made her remarkable was her heart, her loyalty, her willingness to serve without recognition or reward. Those qualities were always there, whether you chose to see them or not. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing the judgment in his words. "The same is true for all of us," Caspian continued. "Worth isn't determined by what others think of you, or how much money you're worth, or whether you can prove your pedigree. It's determined by how you treat others, especially when no one important is watching." He turned to stroke Wistba's neck, and the mayor responded with the gesture that would become legend in Millbrook's history. Instead of her usual gentle nuzzle, Wistba did something she hadn't done in years, something that racing fans would have recognized as the behavior of a champion. She reared up on her hind legs, not in distress or rebellion, but in a magnificent display of power and grace that made every person present gasp in wonder. Despite her arthritis, despite her age, despite the pain that Dr. Vale's medications could only partially control, she rose like the thoroughbred champion she had always been, for a moment suspended in time. Wistba stood against the sunset like a living statue, her mane flowing, her head held high with regal bearing that no amount of mockery could diminish. Then she settled gently back to earth and walked directly to Mayor Crane. The man who had led the town's ridicule stood frozen as Wistba approached him with deliberate steps. She stopped directly in front of him and extended her muzzle toward his face, not in aggression, but in the ancient gesture of equine forgiveness. Her dark eyes held no anger, no resentment, only the quiet dignity of a soul that had learned to rise. Above petty cruelties, Mayor Crane's composure crumbled completely. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out with trembling hands to touch the mayor's soft nose. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "God forgive me, I'm so sorry." One by one, Wistba moved through the crowd, offering the same gesture of grace to each person who had mocked her. Mrs. Frost sobbed openly as the mayor nuzzled her shoulder. Children who had laughed and pointed now stood in awe, learning their first real lesson about dignity and forgiveness. "I'm keeping her here," Caspian announced when Wistba had completed her circuit of reconciliation. "This is her home. These are her people, for better or worse. She's already shown us what it means to be a true champion, and she's going to finish her life where she's always belonged." The Kentucky Horse Park curator, who had witnessed the entire scene, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Son, we'd be honored to create a traveling exhibit about Wistba's story instead. We'll bring her legacy to the world, but let her stay where her heart is." Valencia Cruz lowered her microphone, recognizing that she had witnessed something too sacred for ordinary journalism. The story she would file that night would focus not on monetary value or racing pedigree, but on the moment when an old mare taught an entire town about the true meaning of nobility. As the crowd dispersed, many stopping to apologize personally to Caspian and promise to do better, Dr. Vale approached for a final examination. What he found defied medical explanation. Wistba's vital signs were stronger than they'd been in months, as if the act of forgiveness had renewed her spirit along with theirs. "Some healings can't be measured in a laboratory," he told Caspian. With a knowing smile, the town of Millbrook would never be the same. Wistba lived 3 more peaceful years, surrounded by love and respect. Her story inspiring visitors from around the world who came to meet the champion mare who had chosen grace over bitterness. When she finally passed, the entire town attended her funeral, and a bronze statue was erected in the town square with a simple inscription, "Wistba she taught us to see with our hearts." Mayor Crane, transformed by his encounter with true nobility, went on to lead the town with genuine humility. Mrs. Frost became the area's most dedicated volunteer at the animal shelter, and Caspian, with the money from the traveling exhibit and book deals about Wistba's story, not only saved his family's farm, but turned it into a sanctuary for elderly horses, a place where worth was measured not in bloodlines or ribbons, but in the quiet dignity of creatures who had spent their lives serving others. The horse's response had indeed changed the town's heart, proving that the greatest victories are not won on racetracks, but in the moments when we choose love over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and grace over revenge. In the end, Wistba had run her most important race, not for a trophy, but for the souls of the people who had forgotten how to see true worth. She had won